A first alert now about how Americans feel about artificial intelligence. And Aisha's at the First Alert Safety Desk. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is quickly evolving.
It is, Tammy, and I'm just looking over this 10-page national survey this morning by consumer watchdog Consumer Reports. It looks at how people feel about AI and how it's influencing decision-making through digital algorithms, things like shopping, housing, employment, and healthcare, and how AI is influencing all of those things. This report is really involved. Again, it's 10 pages, but some of the highlights this morning, the survey found a majority of Americans are uncomfortable about the use of AI and algorithmic decision making. When Americans were asked how they would view it if a company used AI or algorithms to make decisions about what products or services to offer, about a third of Americans say they're just not sure. That was the most common response throughout this report. And there's a section about how AI is influencing the way companies make marketing decisions. Consumer Reports asked Americans how they feel about price discrimination or personalized pricing for products. Nearly half of Americans, 47% actually, said they strongly oppose that. Another 19% somewhat oppose it, while 26% neither supported or opposed. In a nutshell, policy analyst for Consumer Reports this morning, her name is Grace Getty. She says, quote, "The survey shows that a majority of Americans are uncomfortable with the use of AI in high-stakes decisions about their lives." She says, "We also found that in certain circumstances, Americans really want to understand what information an AI system is using to assess them, and they want to change to correct that incorrect information." So Consumer Reports has been pushing for state legislation across the U.S. that would require companies to disclose more information about how they use AI tools and be more transparent. Again, this is 10 pages long. There's even some content about job searching and how AI is influencing that. We'll have the full link to this report at WBAY.com under the Safety Desk tab. Tammy.
Aisha.